From The Economist in London, this is Money Talks, a weekly discussion of issues in the worlds of business, finance and economics. I'm Peter Collins, the business editor.
And I'm Edward Lucas, the energy editor.
And this week we'll be talking about the prospects of a fall in the oil price and which oil companies will get hurt most, about the revival in the British motor industry and the prospects for the disposable battery. So first of all, Edward, the economy's generally recovering, many parts of the world. We've seen the oil price, if you measure the NYMEX price, oscillating for a few years now between sort of $80 a barrel and $110 a barrel. It's somewhere in the middle of that now. What reasons might we have for a significant fall in the oil price?
I think that ever since the Iraq war and the sanctions on Iran, we've had a couple of artificial squeezes on the oil market. And these may be coming to an end now. I think if you look around the world, you can see there's more capacity coming back in Iraq. There's sanctions probably lessening on Iran. You've got probably the recovery of oil production in Libya and some other new fields coming on stream and all the other technical improvements that you get in other places. And that really creates quite a substantial downside risk, I think, for the existing oil producers.
Now you have this situation with OPEC that it's not a perfect cartel. It only has a chunk of the oil production of the world, albeit a lot of the cheapest. And what's supposed to happen in a situation like this is the price starts to fall. The governments of the OPEC countries tell their national oil companies to turn the taps, especially the Saudis, turn the taps down, let's have a little bit less oil flowing, and therefore that pushes the price back up. But they have to be pretty determined, because that means they lose revenues. What's their level of determination these days to fight a fall?
I think it's going to be difficult for OPEC, which is basically the Saudis and their Gulf allies, because if they do cut production to raise prices, they're sacrificing market share to these newcomers. And I think given the intense hostility between Saudi Arabia and Iran, for example, the idea that the Saudis would pump less oil and all the Iranians can sell more is quite a tough one for the Saudis. So I think it's more likely that they would increase capacity and let the price go down on the knowledge that their lift cost is quite low, their production cost is quite low, and so although it'll hurt them, it'll hurt others even more.
So who are these people who will get hurt the most? Who are the high-cost producers?
Well, two leap to mind. One's Russia, and the Russian budget, as we write this week in The Economist, only balances with oil at $120 a barrel, so they're already hurting, and they'll hurt a great deal more if it goes down. The Russian oil and indeed gas industry are spectacularly badly run and vulnerable to this sort of competition. I think another potential vulnerability would be in the American tight oil, which is the unconventional kinds of oil production, where again costs are quite high, and they'd be hit quite severely if the Saudis really do turn the pumps on. The thing that really struck me in recent days was the news of booming British car production. It's fashionable among some of the sort of moaners and groaners to say that British manufacturing industry is on its last legs, and we're actually now the second largest car producer in Europe, and it's really a striking success, albeit not under British management but under largely foreign ownership. What's going on there?
Well, it is interesting that we're now sort of halfway back from where we fell from in the crisis. That we used to sell in Britain about 2.5 million cars a year before the crisis. In the dark days of 2009, that went down to 2 million. We're now around 2.25 million. So it's partly that we had a fall, and we had a big one, and we had it sooner than other countries in Europe, but partly because the British economy is recovering.
And there's something quite odd. We're selling cars that's very different from the ones that we here in Britain actually drive.
That's right. We make about 1.5 million cars in this country. So in sheer numbers of units, we're still behind. We still have a trade deficit and so on. And yet we have this peculiar thing that we sort of make Range Rovers and sell them to foreigners, and then we import Skodas and cheap cars and drive them ourselves. So the recovery in the overall industrial balance, if you like, is a lot better than it seems.
And what's happening with the car companies in Europe and America? Are they sharing this upturn?
It's very varied. America is also having a recovery. It's to some extent linked to the recovery in housing markets and the feel-good factor, but also that Americans buy a lot of pickup trucks, something we don't really buy very many of in this country or in Europe, and therefore they are more closely linked to the business cycle, to construction and so on. In Germany, in spite of the recovery of the economy, they still had ended the year down. In places like France and Italy, things are very bad indeed. Italy's sort of gone way back down in terms of, sort of mid-90s levels of car sales, partly because of the state of the economy, but partly because just generally you need a feel-good factor to make such an irrational purchase.
And how solid is this British recovery? Is it? Do you see any vulnerabilities there?
Well, one thing to look at is why literally how people are paying for these cars. An awful lot of cars now, sort of 2/3 or so, are bought, this is new cars, although it also applies to some extent to used cars, are bought with a new type of leasing situation in which you put down a 1/3 deposit approximately on the car. You then have very low monthly payments compared with, let's say, the old-fashioned hire purchase payments. And then 3 years, you're offered a buyout. You can either pay this chunk of money and keep the car or hand it back. And what's been happening is so far the manufacturers who've been putting a lot of the money up really want you to hand that back and buy another new car, because that means that you buy a new car sooner, 3 years instead of, let's say, 4 years. Of course, what will happen is we'll see what happens when all these 3-year-old cars start to hit the market, whether the used car prices will hold up, because they are depending on selling on those cars into the used market to make up their money. This is another of these interesting things that we'll have to watch out and see how it works out. Anyway, on to our third topic now, which is the disposable battery. I've noticed that I've got used to the idea of plugging in a smartphone or two overnight, recharging a battery that doesn't come out of the machine. You've got all these apps that can turn your TV remote control into an app on the phone, therefore you don't have a remote control with a set of batteries that you keep replacing. One would think that the days of the disposable battery must be numbered. How bad is it for them?
Well, I really noticed this trend over Christmas when I forgot to buy any batteries, which normally at Christmas with children one buys lots of batteries to go in all the toys, and this year I forgot and we didn't need any. And that set me thinking about the future of these very expensive little metal tubes. It must be one of the most expensive ways of buying power in the world, and buying this mixture of manganese dioxide and zinc and alkali. And the story for the producers is quite a tough one, really, that there's production is very cheap, and there's a great deal of companies in emerging markets and elsewhere producing low-cost batteries. And getting people to pay premium prices for the premium batteries is quite tough. You've got Duracell, particularly with their new Ultra or Quantum, as it's called in some places. They're having to put a lot of marketing money into that to try and get people to buy it in supermarkets and so on. But lower down the scale, it's really proving quite tough. And there's not much relief in sight. Technology and changing lifestyle and people's natural thrift and better rechargeables are all conspiring to nibble away at the market share.
We're still seeing the Energizer bunny on the television in America. It's the Duracell bunny in Britain. I think the two actually compete against each other in America, and Energizer has the rights to the bunny in America. Is that working, basically? The proposition is that cheap batteries run out quicker. It's better to pay all this extra money for batteries that last longer. Does that still work, basically?
I think the maths of it are questionable. It depends a bit what sort of device you're running. And there are some things, for example, you actually need the super premium or ultra super premium, which is the lithium battery, which are very expensive, but they're very robust. They don't go flat in cold weather, and they have the power to do something like a digital camera. But I do think it's all being nibbled away. You're having to put more and more marketing money into getting people to buy these things. And the improved rechargeables and the a whole range of devices now that just don't need batteries at all. One of the people we quote in the article I wrote said there are fewer cavities, and he wasn't talking about dentistry, he was talking about the little things on the backs of your devices that you used to have to pry open and put batteries into, and now you just plug it into a USB cord and the other one's on your computer and it just charges up just like that.
Okay, I think that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks, Edward. If you have any queries, please visit our Schumpeter blog at economist.com/blogs/Schumpeter. In London, this is The Economist.
The Economist.